Hip politics, baby.
All right, we are back. Welcome back to the Hip Politics Podcast. It's your boy, Mr. Cameron Calvin, a.k.a. Mr. Hip Politics, a.k.a. your favorite Politico, and I'm here. This is a special one.
A.k.a. Mr. White House.
A.k.a. Mr. White House, a.k.a. Mr. 216 to the 202. We're here for another great conversation on the Hip Politics Podcast, Beyond the Podium. This is our Beyond the Podium series, where we talk to elected officials and get them from beyond the podium. Most people really see their elected officials, whether they're mayors, city council, members of Congress, senators, even the president, vice president, they see them behind a podium, and that means there's a teleprompter, there's notes, there's all the things that they're supposed to say. Maybe they go a little off the cuff. These are straight conversations, and I'm happy to say I know I'm going to get a real conversation because I'm going to call BS if I hear it with an actual friend of mine and a former colleague, and now and I'm really been supporting this brother for a few years now, who now became the first African-American and the youngest ever member of Congress of the House of Representatives in the state of Rhode Island.
That's right.
All the way from Pawtucket.
Yep.
All the way from Pawtucket.
We're going to have to work on that pronunciation.
Pawtucket?
Pawtucket.
Oh, I'm sorry. All the way from Pawtucket, Rhode Island.
That's right.
We have the one and only Congressman Gabe Amo.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, I have been a fan of hip politics for a while. I'm glad we finally got this scheduled. Frankly, it was because of congressional dysfunction that we can do this on a Saturday afternoon. But I look forward to getting into some of the things we're working on, where I came from, how I got to Congress, and really the intersection of the culture and what we need to do for people across America. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. And as you said, behind the podium, this is my favorite setting. I don't want to be behind podiums. I enjoy conversations, and that's, part of my brand is to be as direct and real with folks. And I look forward to what we'll be able to talk about over the next few minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Congressman. Gabe, can I call you Mr.
You can call me Gabe. Just call me Gabe. I'm only 6 months in, so I'm not even used to the title.
But I'll start there, and this will go back to, and this is going to tie into some things I want to ask you about. What you're doing is, you're right. I'll call you Gabe. We've for the audience and for the listeners, Congressman Amo and I, we both worked in the Biden White House. We were there during this term. And it so happened that the Office of Digital Strategy, where I was, in the Intergovernmental Affairs Office, where he held his position, we were right next and shared doors and walls. So we're right. in and out, just whether it's coffee, whether it's a quick question, whether it's hey, do you know what's going on? Whether did you see?
Whether it's complimenting Cam on the Jordans he's wearing to the White House because he keeps it a buck.
Yes.
No, we were in close proximity, and in fact, I think you all were in 115. I sat in 114 and then 110, so I know that space well. And in fact, when I was a White House intern in the summer of 2010, I sat in 115. So I've spent a lot of time
in that little corner. In that corner. So to that, I'll say that, and reason why, having known you as Gabe, but you are a member of Congress, and I came up in Congress. That's how I got my political start. First as a fellow on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, which I know now you sit on. Yes. And then I spent years working for the illustrious Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson of Dallas, Texas. And something she taught me, and I got to see firsthand behind the scenes, was the respect that does come with that office. Yeah. And whether they're your peers, people your age, older, younger, my dad is a United Methodist bishop now. He was a pastor, and I've come up in a family where understanding, like, you worked really hard for that role. If I get a PhD or I go to medical school, people will call you doctor.
That's right.
You got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, votes. You're overseeing 400 plus thousand constituents and helping shape the direction of our country. So even as your peer, I mean, but definitely in public and anywhere else, I'm always going to address you as Congressman.
Well, I appreciate that.
You work that hard.
And that's what a lot, some of the older, heads, older members of Congress said, look, you earned that title. We call you the title that you earned. It was given to you, right? It didn't come from heaven. It wasn't divine intervention outright, but it was the faith and confidence of the people who voted for you. In my case, the 500,000 people in my district, less than that voted for me because I was in a special election. Hope I get more votes next time. But it is essential that I know that I'm accountable for it. And the title actually, puts forward a way to carry myself and to be representative at all times. So, while I encourage people to be familiar with me and certainly be close to me by, calling me whatever they want to, sometimes it's not nice things. I do know that that it is a sacred responsibility vetted in our country by our forefathers, by our constitutions, but also the people who worked really hard to make it possible for me to be the 60th member of the Congressional Black Caucus and represent the people in the 1st Congressional District of Rhode Island.
So let's start there. Rhode Island, a lot of people don't think, if they at first thought like, dang, there's probably not a lot of black people up there. Mm-hmm. Not only that, like you're young, you're what, 36?
36.
36 now. You won when you were what, 35?
35, yeah.
You are clearly in the middle of a millennial generation, a generation that is really kind of owning its power. I think like the breadth and the depth and like the real lifeblood right now of the hip hop generation, I would say. Can you talk about what it means or how you've reflected and what you're trying to reflect is that like at this specific age and stage to be a black man from a state and place most people probably don't associate with like large black populations, also to be son of immigrants, like you're checking a lot of different lanes of like immigrants and like what they see themselves as, young brothers, what they see themselves as, black folks in general, young people and younger people when they, there's a lot of talk about ageism and the age of everybody from the president on down to members of Congress and leadership and in this next generation of people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who really want to take that next step. Have you reflected on that? And how do you hope to utilize that and really pour into that next generation and of those folks who...
Completely. Well, look, when I was running for this office, I tell people to this day, I ran not to make history, but to make a difference. But you make a difference by bringing your whole self to what you do. I'm often reminded of the poet Walt Whitman in the poem that he put forward, Song of Myself. He says, do I contradict myself? Yes, I contradict myself very, very well. Then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Right? We all contain multitudes, and it's all about what we bring forward to the table, right? And so, I check a lot of boxes. Black. I'm young. I've got a lived experience as a black man in this country, but also the son of 2 West African immigrants. I'm from a state that was the hub of the slave trade for decades during the heights of it, right?
If you look
at Newport, Rhode Island, you look at it, the Brown brothers, and they weren't brown by skin, but brown by last name, John and his brother Moses Brown, were some of the biggest enslaved people traders, funding multiple trades. But at the same time, Moses became an abolitionist, a Quaker. I went to a high school named after him, right? All of these inherent contradictions. But I don't stay mired in the past. I see how we can use all of that background and my own lived background as the son of 2 West African immigrants to inform what I think is a dynamic understanding of what a millennial is in this moment. When you think about the continent of Africa, for example, 1 in 4 human beings on this planet will be from Africa within the next several decades. That is a
1 in 4.
1 in 4 human beings because of the rapid growth in population. So you look at that and we think about the American century. This will be another American century, but how does that encapsulate the perspectives across the Atlantic Ocean? And you also have what we see in my own district. Just because it is not one of the most black in the country, there are specific black perspectives to be offered, historical perspectives, folks with a range of backgrounds, whether it's from the diaspora or from generations past the period of slavery. So I know that it is incumbent on me to represent all of that and all of the people who don't look like me. who really just want effective representation. They were with me because I said something through the campaign that I say all the time, that in all of our lives, there's somebody who came before us. It could be 10 years ago, it could be 110 years ago, or 210 years ago, who exhibited a great amount of hard work, great resilience, and determination to make our tomorrows better than their today. And that's where we are. And so, like, that sounds cheesy. It sounds like a tagline.
No,
but that's what connects black and white. That's what connects Latino and Asian. That's what connects old and young, is that faith, that commitment to the promise and the possibility of our politics being something that is about progress. That's what I'm talking about.
Hold up. This is how I know some things that God ordained are things like are in you, because you talk. We talk all the time, but I'm really fascinated about like how you encapsulate when I think about what leaders are, and as we even talk about like I said, the next younger generation. There's something that leaders of the past and hopefully leaders now in the future have to understand, is that like when you're representing people, you're to a point you're encapsulating so many different ideas, but to be able to verbalize that and be it enough to captivate, and I'm like, hold up, yeah, for real. I appreciate that, and that to that point is that all those people who do see themselves in you, but you touched on something else, and I want to go here, is that all those people who just want to see effective leadership in Congress. What made you say, you know what, I'm gonna go there and like try to make that place a little bit better? Because I think what people see now, just thinking about the votes of we're recording this today on April 20th, 420, and when we think about it's a Saturday, but Congress has to be in session. I mean, you got to get it done. You got to get it done.
Exactly.
But all people here, Democrat, Republican, or whatever, they just see a bunch of talk and rhetoric, but they're not seeing the bills pass, not seeing we constantly see, like, is the government going to shut down? Yeah. Like, I feel like I've heard that narrative, and that story has popped up, and people who are paying attention are halfway, like, is the government going to shut down? We saw what that was like under Obama. Like, what about Congress right now in this moment in time, A, made you want to go there? Yeah. And B, what do you attribute the ineffectiveness to, like, actually, like, wheel and deal, move legislation and, like, really do what people send you there to do?
Yeah. Well, look, I'll break it into two parts. The first part is why I thought that. Now, my experience has been not in legislative bodies. I hadn't even been an intern in Congress, let alone be elected to anything before, other than student government in college and high school and such, before I ran for this seat. But when I decided to get into this seat, I thought about my experience focused on the good days and bad days in America. Good days, right? We were there for many of them. President Biden signing historic legislation that, you know, sometimes fall into what I call acronym soup, but I define it simply by investing in our people and our places, because it gets all into bill names that people lose. But when I talk about investing in our people, that's that child tax credit. That's making sure that we are lowering prescription drug costs, making healthcare affordable. Our places, infrastructure, water, broadband, places. That's what that agenda needs to be discussed as, and that's how I do it. But I also know that I'm built from coming out of fires and fighting fires on the bad days in America. Your mass shootings, wildfire, extreme weather, building collapse, public health issues from COVID to Mpox. I have been on the front lines trying to respond to those. So I think we need more people who can manage crises. Now, legislating
does
is
that
not
mean
just
we're always going to live in a crisis?
That doesn't mean, but
it feels that way.
It means that you are steeled by that experience to go into what is a crisis of confidence in our Congress. However, that's not driven by, look, respectfully to the other side of the aisle, and I am, you know, a partisan official, but that's the insanity of the Republican Party right now, is that they have a brand that is built on doing nothing for the American people. And that's desired. That's actually what they want. Whereas under the leadership of Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, Pete Aguilar, the leadership that I have in the Democratic caucus. We want to do things. We don't have the numbers. This is why we're going to have to work really hard this November around the country to get the House back, to win the presidency, and to hold the Senate. But what motivates me is that experience I have seeing things actually get done, knowing that I have spent more time in the executive branch getting things done that will help fuel my ability to be effective, to see outcomes in the House.
And try to come bring those.
And then bring people together.
Bring
because,
those outcomes there.
Look, when Republicans, Democrats, what they have in common, they all have mayors. And so at the White House, I was the mayor's guy. I was talking to every mayor in America, Republicans, Democrats, trying to help them get the things they needed for their communities. When there was a mass shooting, I didn't look at whether you were a D or an R. When we were talking about infrastructure, there's no red bridge or blue bridge. It's all, mired in the same desires to serve your people. We've got to remember that leadership is about service. It's servant leadership. And when you have it twisted, that's when you get into self-preservation, which is what we see.
I think a lot, we see a lot of people who, that's always been my thing about Congress is that, and this, you get it on both sides of the aisle, that from the inside as a staffer, you start to see it is about self-preservation. Like, I'm not going to do too much. I'm going to do just enough. If you're in a district where you constantly need to raise money,
that's what you're
that
doing,
can you're start, or there's certain interests, and those aren't bad. Like, hey, if there's a major employer in your district, you should make sure they're okay because they keep a lot of people in your area that you represent employed. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but it's that being, like I said, being young and like you've gotten stuff done in the executive branch. And you're like, all right, I know we need to go and be effective over here, but I'm curious. One thing you mentioned earlier, like, what it means to be the 60th member of the Congressional Black Caucus, I think, which is, whether people know it or not, that's the... Can you explain?
Yeah.
Just break it down for our audience.
Folks,
what is the Congressional Black Caucus and what does it mean? Because this is the largest CBC we've ever had. So explain that, because I think that people will look to, because my follow-up of where I want to go with that is what actually looks different in a person's life if they do vote more Democrat and we do... Yeah. And the Democrats do take over the House and take over the Senate, or like in terms of be the leading party there. Hakeem Jeffries would be the first ever black Speaker of the House, which is great. But what does it actually look like in a person's life? Like, because I think it starts with the CBC being so powerful.
Look, it's one of the greatest honors that I will have to be part of this illustrious group. In 1971, the black members of Congress, of which there were less, I think about a dozen, came together, largely representing mostly black districts, right? Unlike mine, where my district is about 8-9% black. Most of these folks were representing districts that were like 50-60% black, but came together to collectively form what we call the conscience of the Congress, right? That is connected and rooted to people who have come through great struggle and have elected folks to Congress to make sure that we're on the right path of providing opportunity for people across this country and representing our values in all facets of our government, both domestic and abroad. So when you take that original crew, right, people like Shirley Chisholm, right? When you take that original crew and you extrapolate it on today, this is their wildest dreams. Because they have people in districts like mine, district like Congresswoman Lauren Underwood's, to having the legacy leaders like someone like Jim Clyburn, who was a giant and a legend, was a founding member of SNCC, the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, who I have the privilege of sitting in the same room with. Sometimes it blows my mind, right? John Lewis, Elijah Cummings, both deceased legends who brought forward a vision of justice and fairness and a response to the needs of our communities. What it means, and not to discount the illustrious black women who have been forefront. Eddie Bernice Johnson, whose legend I get to be in the shadow of as a member of the Science Committee. Joyce Beatty, immediate past chair of the CBC. So there are a lot of people to shout out. So I don't want to get myself into trouble.
That's why, don't get yourself into trouble. First of all, this is a blanket shout out to the whole CBC. I saw you try to come back like, hold up. Oh, I didn't name any women. Let me go back.
No. But here's what it means.
what you mean. What is it like?
The material benefits of that.
60 members.
Yes, 60
what
members.
does that member?
What it
mean?
means is that it transcends the lines across the country, because you have members of this body who are very much dedicated to economic opportunity. I think that is one of the tenets of the CBC for everybody, because we also know in this country, every economic statistic tells you that when black folks do better economically, the country is doing better, right? We have right now record small business starts black people. When you look at the impact of the child tax credit, it cut child poverty by 40%, but 50% for black folks. So, it's a leading indicator of progress, right? When you invest in communities of color, specifically black folks across the country. But beyond that, what it means is that certain priority issues that are acutely felt in the black community that we invest in will have an impact on the whole population. They often say when the general population gets a cold, the black population gets the flu. Right, because because of the disparate impact of some policies,
A lot of policies,
right? Of a lot of policies, and look, some of it is because we are not centering and being intentional about how you develop and whose outcomes we need to focus on. And you need to focus on everybody at all times, but you also know that when you invest specifically in the black community, you do tend to see great progress.
We can't run away from I think so often, and I think you represent a class and a new generation of leadership across the country, and elected leadership that has an opportunity to say, we've seen the attack on education, on the attack of even being able to say what slavery was in certain states, and
a historical,
like trying to erase our history in this country. There's such a thing of like, hey, we need to overcorrect here because we overcorrected the other way for 400 years.
Without a doubt.
And we've seen that with other communities. So it's not, but I think that millennial and this younger generation has finally grown up in a place where we're now several decades into being in the middle class that we see rapidly decreasing, but we've had middle class families.
But just think about all the things that have hit millennials.
So we can push that. This is no longer like a taboo thing to say like, hey, should I in Rhode Island or Maine care about investing in black communities in North Carolina?
Because everybody will rise. That's the thing. This is win-win-win. Like sometimes we get so zero-sum about the economic benefits. If somebody's gaining, somebody's losing, or I'm paying for this and someone's benefiting and I'm losing. That is not the right framework. We want in this country an agenda, an opportunity agenda where everybody thrives. And the only way to do that is make sure you focus on where the biggest challenges are, where the most historical wrongs have been, because that is how you bring everybody up. And that's really what I think about when I think about the material benefits of having the first black speaker. Speaker Jeffries would tell you himself what he's working on is going to affect everybody. But I will tell you, there's both an importance in symbolism and in outcome, because you'll see us focus on policies that are really empowering of people. I think the child tax credit, for example, right? What people get confused about that. What is the child tax credit? What it meant was more money directly to people to deal with life's difficulties and the things that it throws at you. Gives you more money on a monthly basis, because it was refundable every month, to invest in your own job training, to pay for childcare, to help food if your shifts were off, to support your family. And we know that caregiving is a really big part of it. So, when you are providing care for others, knowing that can be disruptive to your life. Things like paid sick leave, that's something we have to come to at a national level to make sure everybody has it. When you look at what we're doing around infrastructure, it's great. But if we don't have an education system that has teachers who are empowered, students whose mental health challenges have been addressed, and a system that is able to take those Title I funds and ramp them up and help our students who are struggling the most, that's what I'm talking about. So an opportunity agenda is what I see coming forth. And that means...
And an agenda that I think the biggest thing, being a comms guy, I think, and you mentioned it lightly before, it gets caught in acronym soup, things are happening and stuff is flowing into community, but now in this stage of media, stage of different perspectives, a crowded internet, a crowded social media marketplace, TVs, like a 1,001 options. I think it's harder than ever for people to understand things that are happening, and with these sways of leadership and these battles back and forth.
Well, it goes back to
it's hard for things to either both happen, pass, be implemented, and then let me talk about it, and then you go and see how it happens. Like, we used to have a longer runway. Now we don't have that runway. But something I wanted to, when thinking about it, and kind of bringing it back here, we've got our surroundings here, just in terms of some of these hip hop, I would say hip hop figures. Here, it makes me think about this picture I've got up here. I purposely chose this. I've got a series of these. These are some of the greatest battles in hip hop history, and I know what's happening right now on the Hill in this election season is you're on one side or the other. And kind of to bring this back, I'm curious if you pay attention. Like, you can't be doing all work. I know you, whether it's when you're working out, you're riding around, you're flying back and forth to your district or something, like you still. I know you, so I know you still.
No. I have to keep a pulse on what's happening in the world. You know,
what's happening. Like, did you look? Well, before I get into that question, did you look up one day and say, like, "Dang, I'm not doing this thing I used to like doing"? All the time?
I don't get to listen to
what was the
movies
thing
and music.
Movies
and movies, I just fall asleep in every movie. Like Dark Room. Movie playing, I'm out.
You used to like going to the movies?
Or just watching, going to the movies, but watching them at home. I'm just tired. And so, like, that's a long period of time. And it's usually at one end of the day and late at night. And then music, I'm just, like, not keeping up with some of the...
Because you don't have any... You probably don't have anywhere to listen to it at.
I mean, in the office on the phone, I just put it on my desk. So I used to listen to a lot more and know... You know what the kids are listening to. Now I feel like an old man at 36, but... Those are two things I don't get to do as much of anymore.
What's one cool thing that you do get to do that you're like, oh, I'm a member of Congress now? This thing just...
I don't know, man.
There gotta be something.
Look, as corny as it sounds, it's
is like an escort? I'm sorry. Let me clarify that. Is it like a police escort to get you somewhere? Let me make sure.
I mean, look, people at the airport know who I am, but that doesn't mean I'm not going through TSA like everybody else. I think, look, the majesty of being on that House floor. I don't know. I'm a geek, so like I would sometimes watch C-SPAN, for fun when I was younger, and it's like, oh, I'm on C-SPAN like every night, like that's wild to me. Or look, I think the thing that I don't discount is like getting to see young people who are like, oh, you're my congressman, and they're like, they say Congressman Amo, and I'm like, that's weird because I don't feel that much older than them, but they can look at me in a way that I didn't necessarily have the same thing to look at as an example. I didn't have I didn't have a black congressman to look at. I didn't have, someone who was the son of West African immigrants. I didn't have that as an example or as a model. So I had to break that mold. And so it was cool when you have, kids who are white, kids who are Latino, kids who are black, no matter, I see the way they're looking at me.
You're like,
and they're like, I could do that too. And I want them to feel that way. That's empowering. That's amazing.
Well, have you had enough time to tune into the World War III? There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of conflict and strife in the real world. So I definitely don't want to minimize that. But there's also a lot in the hip hop world. I feel like somebody pushed
Aubrey and Kenny.
Somebody pushed the button somewhere.
Metro Boomin. He's just look.
Have you been able to hear that?
Looking at this classic poster, right? So the last battle that I for real paid attention to,
real quick, it's Jay-Z versus Nas. It's listing out all the stats of how old they are when it happened, their age, their height. Their funniest nickname, it says Jay-Z was Joe Camel. The nickname was Chip Tooth Kid, and it talked about their albums and Takeover. But this is a classic. Mr. Davis, he's a classic cartoonist and artist.
I mean, this is amazing because
the vibe and the source and Double X Sales of the world. So I have actually a series of his pieces that I have like Common versus Ice Cube. I've got Chris Brown versus Drake.
You do 50 and Ja?
I've got a 50 and Ja. I've got 4 of them.
Yep.
But I think about this. Have you been paying attention to, I say it's World War III in hip hop, like everybody versus Drake.
Everybody. Like, Rick Ross, I thought that this man was on the sidelines and he says, stay tuned. He has stuff for him. Like, I don't know what happens. There's something in the water right now. Aubrey, I would say Drake is, look, he's very hateable. Right?
Hold on.
For a lot of
what does that mean? Drake is very hateable.
Look, people are envious. He's successful. He switches his style up. He shouts out Taylor Swift, their homies. Like, I don't know. But Kendrick is also, when you listen to Kendrick's an artistic dude. Kendrick, every album has been a little bit different. I remember when Section 80 came out, and I was like, what is this? I haven't heard something like this in a while, because he had this West Coast vibe, but the production was wild. And so he's also at the top of his game, but like dips his toes in and has other projects he works on. So I feel like some of these dudes...
So the real question is, who you got, Drake or Kendrick right now?
Look, I mean, so these battles have been intense. They're getting real personal. I didn't know these guys knew each other like that, first off. Second, what I would say is I'm going to be pro-peace in this situation. So I'm not choosing anybody. I'm pro-peace.
I'm pro-peace.
Like,
all right,
at least Drake is having fun with it. He brought his mom into it with the text message.
I don't think that was fun. That was a little weird to me. I think Drake is having, because Drake is really a funny dude, but I don't know if you've gotten a chance to hear. I think I played for you.
Yes.
Drake's, when we're recording this is right after Drake just dropped his, I would say, second diss track, where he brings two of America's Most Wanted, Snoop Dogg and Tupac. Yes, you heard me right, Snoop Dogg and Tupac. But the AI Snoop Dogg and Tupac, I think I'm actually doing a breakdown tomorrow, episode about this, because this gets very deep. This goes into like the Gamma record label, which is started by Larry Jackson. It's like a super well capitalized new label that like
AI based.
They're utilizing so many different things. I'll send you the link to it, but there's like a legit big business play behind all this. But this, I think, is the first instance of AI. He starts off with Tupac, and it sounds pretty much like Tupac. Dissing Kendrick Lamar. I'm curious if like Drake wrote it or he just put in the chat GPT like, diss Kendrick Lamar. These are the things I want to talk about.
Could you imagine like Pac and Big having AI? Like you wouldn't hit them up and kick in the door. Like you couldn't simulate that. No. And now we have these large language models that have a capacity to like learn everything on the internet about every rap beef ever. And then you can just put in the style of, and we could do that at home. That's wild.
So the fact that Drake embraced it, and then he rapped himself on the end. He has a Snoop Dogg, and that really sounded like Snoop. We're like, hey nephew, like when we listened to it together before this, and I'm curious. If this isn't a sign of the times,
yeah,
that in a real, what is a tradition in hip hop of like battle rap and or like quote unquote, I won't call it beef, but just battle rap, and people going back and forth on each other, getting personal or not, like we have a history of that too, and I think getting disrespectful, all that thing, but for the sake of the music. But really what I'm talking about is the use and the embracing of artificial intelligence to mimic voices that sound exactly like two very legends. Snoop Dogg is probably easily the most popular rapper person ever, in terms of like across the globe. This guy is doing commercials in India and Japan and Korea, in Nigeria, South Africa.
That's wild.
All these different places. Snoop Dogg is literally one of the most famous people in the world, so everyone knows his voice. And to get a fake version of that voice,
all right, nephew.
And then he put it out, and then I think the distribution model, he put it out on a social media platform on his Instagram. So he's like, that's the only place you can get it.
Like, are the estates of Pac and Biggie?
It's so many issues. So I'm curious for you're on the Science Based Technology Committee.
This is a real AI thing, right? So we have to think about what digital stamping looks like, identity verification looks like, because it goes back to like literally I said like kick in the door and hit them up. Imagine if you had beef that resulted in some serious stuff happening caused by AI. Now, the consequences, right, are like rap beef in this context, but extend to a lot of this technology. I would, am in favor of regulation that helps clarify for consumers what is artificially generated by AI and what is authentic. But art for a long time has always been about imitation. Like, go to the Renaissance. Go to, like, everybody was copying everybody in some way or another. However, the difference is the speed and the technology that enables it. So I do think creating some standards and some ethics around what can be marked as unique, what can be, attributed to someone else, right? Because if you look at this, there are financials associated with it, and so whenever there's money involved, you better believe that the record labels, in the case of these deceased artists, the estates are going to say, well, you didn't either get my authorization, or if you're going to give me, or if I'm going to give you authorization, you're going to have to pay me. And I do think compensating people for their likeness is something that we've done. So we also have laws around parody, where parody is exempt from some things.
And I
so
think that can get real
tricky
tricky
very, very quickly. So I've been spending a lot of time in self-study on AI across the board, right? This is why you see in the writer's strike last year, the Writers Guild of America, one of the provisions in the contract was around the use of AI that could really lead to displacement of writers in Hollywood. This is the same through line.
Not just writers, actors too. Actors are getting scanned.
Yeah.
And their voices are getting scanned. Like, I think it is especially coming into like a national election season. I would push you and push others to really both voice that and understand that, and really, it's quite been known the government usually takes a while to catch up to like what's happening in culture, what's happening in the free market and capitalism. Like, there's a lot of checks and balances, and that's good. The government moves deliberately, especially at the federal level. I think it needs to move faster on a lot of things, but something that should be talked about this year and definitely acted on next year is creating some rules of the road, or to your point on that clarification.
I think there will be some national legislation, but we got to be careful because you don't want to stifle innovation. And so my onus here is on safety, is on protection of people's economic livelihoods, and also making sure that we are focused on not strangleholding the opportunities and the great possibilities that lie ahead. But we always have to start with risk, because risk is something that government can be a good arbiter of, to make sure that we are not setting ourselves up for a bad set of things. And there's action in the House. The big leader on AI is Ted Lieu, and the Senate leader Schumer is doing a lot. So there's a lot swirling, but we have to be very thoughtful and mindful. And that's why I think it's good to have like young members of Congress who are listening to AI beefs. Because,
and realizing, like, while it's fun and games, but it's like, this could, to your point, this extends much further.
This is
than
about
just
proximity.
Yeah. Couple last things. Something, we're sitting here, like I said, it's April 20th, 2024, affectionately known as 420. We're in Washington, D.C., maybe a couple blocks away or about a mile away. The National Cannabis Festival is going on. Obviously, 420 associated with marijuana, weed smoke, but we are now, in this day and age, have moved so much further than even when I was in Congress, like with so many different the state level legalization laws, so many different things. I want to bring this up because there was a really powerful program that the Vice President Harris, and she had actually Fat Joe at the White House talking with people who had been federally pardoned for marijuana. I think one of the biggest things in a lot of communities, but definitely I think with the hip hop community as well, like, not to reduce it to just that, but marijuana and where we are state, local, globally versus federally, and how, like, we have just not caught up there.
Yeah.
So many people who've been put behind bars have been pardoned, but maybe also haven't federally. statewide, it's so many different laws. I'm actually not sure about the laws in Rhode Island.
It's recreational and medicinal, both legal
exactly
in Rhode
like
Island.
Rhode Island. Like some of the Northeast, I think has been leading the way in terms of like Northeast, and then far West Coast is usually associated with that, like the Nevadas, the Californias, Oregon, Washington States, Colorados, and up in the Northeast, Maines and the Rhode Islands, and even now in New York. But I'm curious to like, what are your thoughts on? Because I think when people also think when you think you're a younger person, you're gonna agree on the issues, quote unquote, that younger people do. But I do think that is something that it just, to me, is just not right that it's classified at that. It's the schedule it's at, and for people who know like how it's classified by the federal government, then has a complete ecosystem effect on. Because it's classified as a narcotic, it is the same as so many hard drugs. Now, any business associated with it, those banks can't insure, and it puts them in a whole different cash-based shadow banking, only digital crypto banking, because those banks then don't want to be liable for doing any business with that, even if it is at a state level legalized, even like you said, all the way to recreational. I think we are at a place, and I know the president hasn't fully come around, but he has at least said we should be pardoning, and we shouldn't be holding people who have simple possession, and a lot of stipulations there, which would affect hundreds of thousands of people nationwide. But I'm curious to just your thoughts on how we get smart about weed.
Yeah. Look, I think the president's on the right track with the three pieces that he sort of outlined, right? Which were, one, accelerate the descheduling and calling on Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to work on that. There's no reason marijuana should be classified in the same place as hard narcotics. It just doesn't make sense from a practicality standpoint, from a health impact, from a science impact. Doesn't make sense. So I know they are in process, but I think they need to wrap that up and move from there, because that will then transform the other two pieces, right? The other is no one should be in prison for marijuana, especially at a time where you have conglomerates forming, people making big
Billions.
money, big money. And look at it from an equity standpoint, who is making that money? Like if you are going to have given a generation reasons to be behind bars, most of those people black and brown, then those people should also now be able to, one, be relieved of the prosecutorial consequences, but also be able to benefit from the economy around it. Everybody. If that's your business, great, good. You see these stores popping up, I want the ownership to be diverse. And a lot of states have focused on equity as they've legalized, and I think that's important. But we need to make sure that's real, because it will just be, structurally unfair. And then I think, the last bit is there are some realistic public health concerns. If it does become a mass used, product, then it should be subject to the scrutiny that, other things, medicines or whatever we have in the marketplace is subject to. So that's a regulatory framework that would need to build around it. Because I am actually concerned about the effects on developing brains, right? We do know that your brain has not like fully developed until your mid to late 20s. And so once you go to legalization, it means that young children are going to have access. And yes, they have for a while. I'm not naive to think that there aren't 15 and 16-year-olds, who have access. But I think we need to make sure that we reduce that, and that we study from a public health standpoint what happens on brains. Because what I don't want to have happen is the disproportionate negative consequences.
Especially in our communities.
Exactly. And so we got to be mindful about that, because sometimes we have, these gateway things, like whether it's flavored tobacco products, all of these things that come through the corner stores, and who's getting hit worse by that with the health outcomes, lungs, right? Cancers, all sorts of things. So I'm not saying it to be square, but I'm saying it because that's a realistic thing.
And it's one of those things, like, just marijuana, it has to come into the light. Essentially, like, to your point, so it can be properly regulated, so it can properly be studied. Like right now, it's hard you can't really legally get a lot of studies in the U.S. on NIH and all these governmentally funded things, so we can properly regulate it, understand how to put restrictions around it, and I'm always like, well, what if everybody is all smoking weed and now it just becomes normalized? And I'm like, we have tobacco and alcohol.
we have things that are negative to our health. So we just got to put it in context.
There's structures around it. There's limits. There's penalties for use and vehicles and things of that nature. Like, we can put regulation around it. But to your point, I really liked it earlier. Just also make sure that equity piece, because we know this is a tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars industry easily once it is legalized. And that's another wave that we just don't want. Just like even with AI and all of that and all the technology that it is going to spawn, from quantum computing to these large language models and like the new industries we don't know that are going to be there. We want to make sure Black folks, Latino folks, like people who've been generally disenfranchised proportionally benefit. And this has been fun. I read some stuff. I knew you a little bit. I knew you, but also I was, like I said, I was diving into both your campaign stuff and your website and then also some on your official congressional page. Just, I'm really proud of you. You're on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Yeah. What's that like?
Look, I will say it's a paradigm shift. I spend my time thinking about issues across the world, not just the front burner issues that we see with Israel and the Hamas war and the tragedies that we're seeing unfold from a humanitarian standpoint.
But you're you're a subcommittee for like Africa,
for Europe and Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia. So I this week I was talking about the linkage between Russia and Iran, right, and how that is negative and a negative force for the world that we have to combat. I wasn't talking about that a year ago, but it is important. It unlocks a part of my brain that I didn't get to access before. I've been generally curious about the world and have been self-studied, but now I'm in there, and I'm meeting with prime ministers and parliamentary leaders and ambassadors from across Eastern Europe, the Middle East, from the Baltics to the Caucasus, up to the British Isles. I'm seeing everybody. So it is an education, but this is why this is so important, right? Not a lot of people would think a person like me, with my background, who looks like me, who's got, I've got some great experiences, but doing what I was doing, would be at the table for this. And that's why it's so important that we bring a whole range of perspectives to the table, because our values transcend some of those basic identifiers about us.
And then you're also on, like I said, my favorite committee, the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. So a little story.
Yeah.
That was how I broke into the Hill. My first job, I got hired in 2009. I was a fellow starting in January of 2010, and this is as we're still understanding with social media and digital. So as a fellow, I came in and I got to build their first Twitter page. I got to build out their first Facebook page, like early. That's where we were. Yeah, that's when we were just. It had just finally caught up to Congress. Like, I guess we need to do this and stuff. I'm like, well, yeah, I knew that. And as we mentioned, like, my political grandmother mentor that brought me in, Eddie Bernice Johnson, eventually became the ranking member. Unfortunately, she didn't stay. She wasn't able to be around long enough. A very, very short period of time to be able to be the chair. Yeah. She was only the chair for a very short period of time. But at least she got to experience that. I know she's first ever nurse. But I know the power. It's like one of those committees I think that people don't see, but like being over parts of the research part of DOE, NSF, National Science Foundation, NASA, NOAA, like all these different things that are really keeping the science alive, when I think we are in probably one of the most anti-science, anti-education environments.
Anti-facts.
What is anti-facts? What does it mean from you, just as a general perspective? Because like going from foreign affairs and all you're learning there, but like to be a scion in the science space and technology sector.
Well, they're connected. They're connected, right? Because it's all about future and possibilities, right? When you think about the world, it's not necessarily about solving for what has happened, but it's predicting and anticipating what's going to happen. And science, when you talk about federal money going to the National Science Foundation, going to the research elements of the Department of Transportation, right? You go to the, that's all unmanned vehicles in the air, to, DOE, to fusion and nuclear technology to thinking about, what we can do with our oceans and our waters in Rhode Island. The economy around the water is very important because we are so proximate to research facilities, to installations across the Atlantic. So what it is to me is I get to be a very future oriented person. And as a millennial, that's
cool.
what we're doing. We're building
really
a future for ourselves.
Well, Gabe Amo, Congressman Gabe Amo.
Thank you.
Brother, I thank you so much. I got a question.
All
I
right,
got
hit
one
me,
last,
hit me.
like close this out. Like,
Yeah.
man, you said you don't get to listen to that much music, but question I like to ask, especially beyond the podium, I need a real answer because I would check your phone if this is not real.
Hit me.
Give me a song that
Yeah.
people wouldn't expect you to be listening to, that you've listened to in the last 2 weeks.
Oh, damn.
A hip hop song or something, or maybe just a favorite song you've been listening to. It could have been old, it could be something new, but something you have had a chance to
Yeah.
like, you know what? I don't think people realize I'm listening to this.
Now, look, it's the 30th anniversary of Illmatic. All right, so it came out in the spring of 1994, and so I've been listening. Illmatic is one of my favorite albums, so I listen to it from beginning to end all the time.
For real?
Yeah, oh yeah. Life's a Bee, the first verse from AZ, visualizing the realism of life and actuality.
Okay.
Okay. To The World Is Yours. I'm out for presidents to represent me.
Get
right?
money.
Right? So, that whole album is something that I listen to on a loop because it's inspirational to me. Because if you think about where Nas was coming from, the Queensbridge projects, hustling, trying to, put his message out there, I just think it is something that has always motivated me and keeps me going.
Well, that's tough. Nas, the life is yours. Life's a beat. I love that. The world is yours.
Yes.
I'm gonna go.
It ain't hard to tell.
It ain't.
I excel and prevail.
Oh, okay. I'm about to go bump some more there as soon as we get finished with this. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. We talked earlier about like I said, everybody versus Drake or World War III, Drake, Future, all these folks. But at its core, I think one of the issues, and this is something new I'm doing, but I think this is quite fitting. At its core, it's talking about this concept of the big three. Apparently, it was for a long time. I guess it was Drake, J. Cole, and Kendrick.
I wouldn't even put Cole there, but whatever.
Yeah, especially after he bowed out. But that's not the point. I'm curious to this. It's a specific big three I want you to give me. What's you from the Northeast, Rhode Island? So then I'll give Northeast. That's Connecticut. That's Jersey. That's New York.
If you want to put those cats in there, see, I'm in New England, a very particular part of the Northeast, but we can separate it. We can put it together.
You can say New England, and that's Connecticut and the Massachusetts and the Rhode Islands and the world of Vermont's in that area. But I'll just say, let me keep it all the way to East Coast.
Yeah.
East Coast, and that gives you Philly too. What's the big three of the greatest East Coast rappers?
Oh,
the big three.
For me, it starts with Biggie.
Okay.
Right? It starts with Biggie.
Right
there
here.
we go. Mr. Wallace, another inspirational song from him that I always vibe with, The Sky Is the Limit. If the game shakes me or breaks me, I hope it makes me a better man. Take a better stand. Put money in my mom's hand. Get my daughter this college grant so she don't need no man. Stay far from timid. Never only make moves on your heart's minute. And live the straight sky's the limit. Right? So Biggie's one for me. East Coast forever. Second is Nas. It's just like, and I'm gonna get myself into trouble. Nas over Jay for me. It's just like, and then Jay. Look, I first meeting I had with Leader Jeffries, I thought I was being clever. I said,
who's the best MC?
I said, look, my performance will be demonstrated on the field. I said, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Right? That's Blueprint 3. But Jay actually, I have loved the way that he's transformed. And, I already shouted out Nas, so I'll stay on Jay for a minute. But, the evolution from Reasonable Doubt to Blueprint, and that's where those are the pinnacles for me. Everything after, I'm not that deeply invested in. But Jay, 444, like, look at that. evolution, and the concept of reinvention is something that we should always value. And now he's got, the baddest in the world on his side. So there he goes.
Your big three. Biggie, Jay-Z, and Nas.
Yeah, that was kind of easy.
That
was kind of easy.
I might need to switch that up in the future. But Congressman Amo, man, I just want to say I am so utterly proud of you, man.
Thanks,
I'm honored to know you. Appreciate the growing friendship we've been building over the last couple of years. It's been a pleasure to work alongside you. Pleasure to laugh with you. Thank you for coming on and talking and educating folks. Like, that's what this whole platform and this is about. It's like, really, like, there's over 93 million hip hop listeners and fans. Mm-hmm. And we estimate as high as 65 to 70% of them are not regular voters. Like, so, and we got to get people to understand a reason of not just why to vote, but even going back to that, like, what their government, what they need to hold them accountable for, what being citizens means, like how to get them civically engaged in our country and in this generation. And I think you're, like I said, I really meant it. Like, you're an example for so many people. So I just want to say to your face, congratulations.
Well, I appreciate you, bro.
Run a good race, but also, continue to govern, like all those, don't lose yourself up there.
Yeah.
Like all those things.
Well, keep me honest, right?
We will.
Keep me honest, because I can't do this
on.
alone.
We'll have you back on in future seasons or for future stuff. We'll definitely reach out. But so I just want to say thank you again. Please let people know how they can get in contact with you on social, online, if they want to check you out.
Look, if people want to get in touch with me, there are multiple ways. I would say officially, you can go to my website, amo.house.gov. That's where you get all the things that I do on the official side. And then when I start...
And by official side, it means
that's my government website. And you can follow me also at Rep Gabe Amo on IG, at Rep Gabe Amo on X, and at Gabe Amo on Threads. You got to be on all of them. And follow my YouTube page at Rep Gabe Amo. And then you can also follow what I do as it relates to our campaign at Gabe Amo, GabeAmo.com. And at Gabe Amo on X, at Gabe Amo on Threads, and my YouTube page, Gabe Amo for Congress. So follow me across the platforms. I look forward to being active, to being vocal, and to being proximate to people across my district, my state, and certainly people across the country, as I can be helpful on doing what we need to do, and that's putting people over politics.
People over politics.
Except for hip politics, because hip hop is the love of my life. That's true.
All right. Thank you, man. And with that, this has been another episode of a Hip Politics Podcast, and we're out. Peace.
Peace.
Hip politics, baby.